think it's important that we talk about consumer relationship with fragrance.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the most part of the second half of the 20th century, right, so the 1900s, fragrance had one primary job. So I think Chanel brought in this idea of intimacy and sexiness and aspiration and things like that. And the whole point of fragrance was to help you feel like Marilyn Monroe. It was to borrow this status. And so if you think back to all of the different ads, and a lot of them still on TV have this playbook, but it's all about luxury and elegance and sophistication and being an adult and either femininity or masculinity. And in general, the marketing tone was really aspirational as a result. Chanel number 5 wasn't really about how you feel, it was about who you become when you wear it. And so from 1950 to about 2010, the fragrance category did grow, but it grew in very specific ways. So the first one was just there were more people. And so you see, geographic expansion, you see, fragrances getting big in Europe, then moving to the US, then moving to Asia. You've got new launches that are replacing old products. You start to see pricing tier expansion, so the beginning of a prestige and a masstige sort of market. The category was growing, but it was growing at low to mid single digits. And so it was really more of a supply driven than demand driven type of growth. And the category didn't really expand its usage or its base in a significant way. And most of the growth came from distribution or trade up behavior, not from how people have changed things. And so it's just really fascinating because from the 1950s to the early 2000s, women dominated the spend, especially in prestige and luxury. Men's fragrance existed, but was more narrow and seasonal. So this might be something that you might give your dad or your boyfriend, your husband, something around a holiday or birthday. Celebrity launches were kind of important for men, but it was really still department store promotion led. And men have lower usage and more sporadic usage than they do today. When you evaluate the core fragrance buyer, they typically skewed older than skincare or makeup, and they were often in their late 30s to 50s. And younger consumers enter the market via gifts and aspirational advertising. It was really the message for young adults was, hey, this is how you become an adult, have an adult fragrance and scent. And so the thought here that was really interesting about this was that the key behavior was that when a consumer chose a fragrance, there really wasn't a whole lot of experimentation. They were choosing identity and they chose to stick with that identity for years on end. And really, once a consumer found a scent that they liked, they would just buy it. And that's kind of how the market was. And so it's just really fascinating that, when you talk about all of that, it's just very different than how you would even view fragrance in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting because in many ways, these fragrance brands were trying to convince people to join their tribe or switch over to their tribe. Why do you think that this worked so well for so long?
It's a good question. I think a lot of this was dependent on the channel structure of the category. So for the most part, fragrance was sold in department stores or in a duty-free shop. So think airports. And really the experience at the counter really mattered. And so, when the sales associate would come or, would talk to someone, they're the ones that were guiding the discovery. They would be teaching people about tones and scents and what would be there. They would help reinforce hierarchy. And they would say, oh, do you smell the hints of amber in here? And people are like, oh yeah, sure. I smell amber. Like, why not? And so you were kind of borrowing this expertise that the sales associate had. And the advertising really reinforced this. And you would lean into celebrities, fantasies, distance authority, all those sorts of things. And so it felt like everybody was chasing the same tone or aesthetic, regardless of the brand. And when you broke it, you started to look cheap. And Estee Lauder really built a fantastic business around this idea of helping consumers ladder up. And so the way that the industry was set for a long time is that you had these luxury fragrance houses that controlled the narrative. Again, there's just five companies that control most of the scent manufacturing, and they set the norms around aesthetics, the anchor price expectations, things like that. Well, then people like Estee Lauder come in and they start create these masstige brands, and they borrowed these narratives, but they widened the access and traded margin for volume. And so you would come into a department store and aspirationally you would want Chanel, right? But once you saw the price tag, you would practically go out and buy something that was like Chanel, but not quite that.
Got it. So it's kind of crazy, but for a long time, discovery was physical fragrance, and it was kind of an occasional product that you would gift or use as opposed to a daily ritual. And the narrative was kind of really this top-down piece. This was the market for a long time. I mean, when did this start to change?
Really continued to get worse before it got better. And if you look at the late 2000s, department store traffic, regardless of the department store, was going down. Younger consumers were disengaging. The advertising just felt very repetitive. I mean, you can picture what a fragrance ad looks like in your head. And you could swap out the name, you could swap out the brand, swap out the celebrity, but they all look the same. And the concept that was underpinning the whole industry was this idea of a signature scent. And that idea was beginning to fade. And no one really had a replacement model for it. The category just kind of plateaued culturally, even if revenue didn't collapse. And I think it's really interesting is that for the longest time, fragrance appeared to be a category that DTC skipped. And if you look at the traditional DTC playbook in 2010, you'd say, okay, well, direct access to the consumer, digital first discovery, lots of repeat usage. Like there's, you can have really good measurable attribution. And obviously this worked very well for skincare, makeup, eyewear, wellness, all sorts of things. But people just assumed that fragrance was going to be next, and it really wasn't. And on paper, like when you look at this and you say, okay, this is very small, it's very shippable, it's got a high gross margin. It should have been a slam dunk from a DTC perspective, but it was very difficult, and very few DTC native brands actually emerged in this time.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like how wasn't this a D2C darling, right? I mean, you look at everything you said in terms of high gross margin, very shippable, small. It makes a lot of sense for the D2C playbook. As we dig into it, what were some of the things that you learned that kind of suggested why fragrance had such a hard time taking root in D2C?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. I mean, fragrance broke almost every assumption in early D2C model for kind of four main reasons. The first one was that discovery was undigitizable. So think about it. Early D2C depended on visuals, demos, before after proof, ingredient education. Fragrance doesn't work like that. You can't smell through a screen. You can't really explain the nuances without sounding abstract, or showing that it worked, right? You can't show like, here's me without a girlfriend and here's me with a girlfriend, and it's because of this fragrance. And the internet kind of just flattened fragrance into copy, which made everything sound the same. And so if you have the same problem with ads on TV where they all look the same, well, people just tried to take that and say, oh, luxury, it's awesome, it's amazing. And every ad seemed the same. So that was the first part that was difficult. The second main issue was that sampling economics really didn't work. With skincare, you could bundle minis, you could have trials that converted people into routines and just create, overall baseline subscription logic. But for fragrance, it was very expensive and actually very logistically annoying. And it was uncertain if people would convert. I mean, how many people would buy a $3 sample to maybe buy a $90 bottle of something that they would have at low repeat frequency? And so it's really difficult. And the department stores had hacked this because the sample method for a long time was you walk up and the sales associate sprays you and you're like, ooh, I like that, or I don't like that. And it's just really not an easy way to solve this in D2C. So that was kind of the second point. The third point was that the usage frequency was really low. And so early D2C winners dependent on habit forming and regular replenishment and subscriptions. So think, I shave every day, I wear contacts every day, I wash my face every day. Those sorts of rituals really made it easy for subscription economics to take hold. And fragrance was really occasion oriented and signature scent oriented. And so people will be slow to repeat because you may not wear a fragrance every day. So, the math would be that someone would buy one bottle for $90, disappear for 18 months, and then maybe come back. And you just can't get those LTV economics to make sense. And I guess lastly, to wrap it up, the marketing narrative really didn't match the internet culture at the time. And again, fragrance was all about aspiration, authority, distance, and internet to internet brands were really focused on relatability, education, and validation. And where skincare's messages were, hey, here's why this works, fragrance's message was more of a trust us. And that just kind of fell flat with the consumer at this point in time.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really the background context of when Fleur entered the market, right? I mean, were people in the industry worried about this in general, would you say?
Not really. I mean, despite all of the slow growth and the plateauing and the aging of the consumer, revenue didn't collapse. It just stopped compounding the way that it could have. And people were still selling fragrances in department stores. And that was like one of the few things that you would go to a department store for. The big players, the Estee Lauders of the world, they were always looking for a new growth lever. And they would do it by introducing a new SKU, making some custom celebrity scents, getting more distribution into duty free or other places. And there really wasn't any focus or effort put into creating new users. It was more about stealing users from existing fragrance wearers. But they didn't focus on improving usage or having a deeper engagement. And as a result, like the average age of the consumer started to age pretty dramatically in the late 90s, early 2000s, 2010s. And it was, because of those kind of bad demographic trends that incumbents and founders and VCs stopped showing interest. And, you contrast this with skincare during the 2010s over this exact period of time. And they had lots of science narratives, lots of daily usage, visible outcomes, and lots of influencer education. And so, brands like Glossier didn't sell products, they sold frameworks. And fragrance didn't really have an equivalent framework online. And so, despite all of this capital, all of the talent, all of this attention that was going into personal care, none of it really made it to fragrances.